Incremental improvement is no longer sufficient in helping organizations navigate the complexity, uncertainty, and volatility of today's world. Our guest today explores how to create non-linear, dramatic change in organizations. He explores the emerging science of change that teaches us about how to build organizations from businesses to governments that change and adapt rapidly. He is author of 21 books, 12 of which have been bestsellers and 13 of which have been honored on lists of best business books or management books of the year. It is a great pleasure to welcome the author of Change, How Organizations Achieve Hard-to-Imagine Results in Uncertain and Volatile Times. He is a legend in the field of change. It's a great pleasure to welcome to the Innovation Show, John Kotter. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Am I blushing?
It's so great to have you, man. I was telling you before we started our interview that I mentioned to the Innovation Show audience through the newsletter that you were coming on the show, and I have a copy of the book behind me here up for grabs, and I've had an unprecedented amount of entrants for the competition this week, and I have a little bit of a Kotter shrine behind me. I have a lot of the books on e-copy. Unfortunately, otherwise I'd have them everywhere behind me because 21 books is an amazing achievement. I thought maybe we just break the news. You've had some amazing news, and I'm so grateful that you've honored our engagement of this interview in the midst of this amazing news that you've had. Just let's tell our audience about this. Change is in the Kotter household.
Oh, yes. At 2:30 approximately this morning, my daughter had her first child, and I had my first grandchild, 6 pounds, 9 ounces, a healthy baby boy, mother and child and hubby all look terrific.
It's fantastic news, and congratulations, first grandchild as well for you, John. I was going to say to you, I have a subtle little thing that I do for every show. I wear a little pin that is a subtle kind of nod to what the show is about, but this one is as subtle as a bag of sledgehammers falling on your head from heaven. It says adapt or die. And I thought it was the ideal pin to wear for our episode together. I was thinking about, John, how to start the show. And I often think about how I love when a superhero movie goes into the origin story of how the superhero became the superhero. And now that I have you, and it's such a great honor to have you, I'd love to hear the John Kotter origin story, how you got to where you are today, 21 books, amazing academic career, amazing career in the field. You've seen so much change in the field of change. I'd love if you gave a little bit of a background of how you got to where you are today.
Let's don't go back to age 0, but very influential in my background story was my doctoral thesis, which I did at Harvard after I attended MIT for a bachelor's and a master's in science. And I studied big city mayors who were in office in the late 1960s, which was a very tumultuous and difficult period in the United States for cities. And ultimately, we studied 20 up close after they were out of office, so you didn't have to deal with politics. The most striking finding, which I think had the most influence on me and subsequent events in my own career, is if you looked at the performance of the best 3 mayors on all kinds of indices, experts' ratings, the economy in their cities while they were in office, whether they had disruptive disturbances that really hurt people, social welfare going up or down or whatever. The distance between the best 3 and the worst 3, the highest performers and the lowest performers, was not large, it was galactic. It was huge. And once you started thinking about that, if the average player, much less the 3 at the bottom, could be moved just a little bit toward those high-end performances, it would have made a huge difference in the lives of millions and millions of people, tens of thousands of businesses, the school systems for kids. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I think I walked away from that more than ever interested in how in the world can we help organizations, public and private, make non-incremental, make some significant jumps in how well they're doing. And that, in turn, took me ultimately to the topic of leadership, because the three mayors and the following people that I studied in business at the top were all called leaders by the people who knew them best, and they were. And the people at the bottom were not. And it wasn't they were the best managers, they were better managers than the people at the bottom. But where they were stellar was leadership. It's the actually working with people to come up with some kind of a vision for where the city ought to go, and talking about it and communicating it enough to get people to buy into it, and creating conditions that would actually energize and mobilize people to make things happen. So it wasn't a mayor by himself kind of micromanaging or just managing a bureaucracy. They had hundreds of thousands of people in their cities, if you will, working on a similar agenda and making a difference. And then leadership took me to change, because I asked, okay, what fundamentally are these leaders doing? And they were helping their businesses or their cities or their governments or whatever adapt to a changing world. And the first study that we did on that was fascinating, which is we asked ourselves, there's an expression I've heard since I was young: the only thing that doesn't change is change. The implication being that change has always been with us, and it's always been kind of at the same level. Well, we measured that, and we said, no, change is going like this. The number of strategic initiatives that you find in businesses that require significant change, not just a little adjustment here or there, we're going up and up and up. And that is what we've been focusing on ever since, because that trend takes us right through to today. You're seeing more changes, faster changes, more volatile changes, more disruptive changes now than 10 years ago, a lot more than 20 years ago. And it makes all the difference in the world in how well organizations perform, how well they can adjust to that, adapt to that, get ahead of that, take advantage of that. And ultimately, when they do, it can, like in the case of my mayors, have a real impact on lots of our fellow human beings. And it's very exciting to study that and to help people.
Innovation always happens at the intersections. And I love that, because you used the term diversity and diversity of thinking in the people that you've studied. And I always think about you, for example, in your background, you did that work on mayors, you went on and you worked in academia, but then you added a new intersection. You were like a living Venn diagram, the middle of the Venn diagram, where you put it into practice. And now it's culminated with your organization, Kotter, Inc. And that's where this latest manuscript sprung from, because in Kotter, Inc., you did a study, and that was deeply understanding the changes in brain science, which has changed dramatically in the last 2 decades. I'd love if we shared this as well, because this was a real turning point in this book, I suppose, that really gave it a different flavor and a different lens.
Exactly. 12 years ago, we decided when all my colleagues were retiring that we'd start a business to try to take what we had learned over the decades and what we continued to learn, and produce the best advisory service in the world on it. As a part of that, we decided from the beginning that we were going to actually do research in the business. Consulting firms say they do research, but it's really marketing. And I don't, that sounds snippy, snarky. And so I apologize. But that is true. Most consulting firms, when they write, it's a marketing thing. And we decided, no, we know a lot about research. So 5 years ago, 4 years ago, one of my colleagues walks into our whiteboard room in our Cambridge office here in Boston and said, John, I had this fascinating experience last week. I said, really, Russell, tell me about it. And he said, I was giving a speech to a bunch of executives at, I think it was Citicorp, but I'm not positive. And he says, in it, I dropped in some of the things I was reading about brain science and about what we're learning these days about the brain. And he said, maybe only 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes, an hour and a half speech. And he said, when I talked about that, people literally, you could see them paying more attention to what I was saying. They were leaning forward more. And I said, well, that is interesting. So tell me what you were reading. That led to us putting together a group of 5 people, 4 of whom were in the Boston office. One had to be brought in virtually. And we decided to look over what the brain science people were doing and had done over the last 20 years or so. And with a particular eye toward does this tell us anything really, really, really important about what we care about, which is improving organizational performance and helping companies change in even transformational ways to adapt and take advantage of opportunities. And we concluded, yes, okay, they really are beginning to find some things. And we devised our own model, which I then ran by all the brain science people saying, have I got this right? Which starts with the fact that human beings, much more than we normally think of, have a kind of a central system built into us that was probably first developed 100,000, 200,000 years ago. Its primary function is all about one thing and one thing only, and it's survival. And it's an enormously powerful system, and it affects us in ways that we don't notice. I mean, it's not like my brain is saying, oh, the survive system is being activated now. It just happens. It's like you've got a radar that's looking for threats. And when the radar sees a threat, chemicals go out, blood increases to muscles. We go into a fight or flight, type of thing where our mind focuses like a laser on the threat. And when it all works well, we take an action like that with huge energy, eliminate the threat, and then calm down. As it turns out, that mechanism, which was designed basically for physical threats, the tiger comes along, I see tiger, boom, it goes into action, and I'm 40 feet up a tree 100,000 years ago. That same system now is reacting to threats, to perceived threats to our companies, our careers, our egos, our self-image, our paycheck, all sorts of things. And in an increasingly changing world, which throws up uncertainties, which are seen as threats, we've got a lot of people that are being thrown into this kind of overheated survive mode. And when that happens, they don't necessarily tap into that part of them. And they've got another part that can help with change, can help with leadership. If anything, it shuts it down. And so that's a big big understanding. The second was understanding the second piece, which is certainly a lot weaker and newer, but it's enormously important. It helps us thrive, not just survive. It's got a radar that looks for opportunities. When it sees them, it sends out chemicals too that create a sense of excitement, some passion. And we tend to want to act to take advantage of the opportunity. And as long as we see evidence, or the mind rather, sees evidence that we're actually getting some results, and hence this isn't a fool's errand, that energy can stay up for a long time. And that is the system that leaders tap into in themselves and others. That is the system that can make transformations. And that is a system which is underactivated in the typical organization. And it makes all the difference in the world when you're talking about performance in a rapidly changing world.
I wanted to zoom in, John, on a certain scenario that you mentioned in the book, and I'll quote a little paragraph that I love. You say, "The executive committee of a financially challenged firm did what they had always seen done before. They launched a restructuring. When word got out that layoffs were coming, not just individuals but whole parts of the enterprise began moving into overheated survive mode. Anxiety, anger and stress went up, morale went down, productivity slipped, innovation was overwhelmed by all this survive exhaustion, along with its narrowly threat-focused minds." And this is often the context into which organizations hire heads of innovation or heads of change. They have these massive restructurings, they bring people in, and this is the context into which they're welcomed, and they don't really stand a chance. I'd love if you unpack this for us, John.
This is a problem that is much worse today than it was 5 or 10 years ago, because innovation becomes increasingly an important part of the changes that what makes change and directs change in organizations. And the scenario, well, one of the stories we tell in the book that is the Kraft Heinz story, which is interesting to me because it can't be written off as a bunch of dummies doing dumb things, because Warren Buffett was involved, and Warren is as smart as anybody you're going to find anywhere, and his track record shows that. But they managed, Warren and Berkshire Hathaway, I think, lost $22 billion or something like that. It's slowly gaining some back. Because Kraft Heinz, when they were put together, went into a restructuring that sounded very much like the scenario you just gave. And it sent everybody into deep survive. And when people are in that, what they needed is, in a changing consumer food marketplace, they needed innovation. That's where the growth was coming from. It wasn't coming from selling more ketchup. It was coming from more healthy foods and more international blends of foods, and innovation. And they tried. I'm sure they had people who were assigned to be the product innovators. Those guys made almost no progress because everybody was so hunkered down, kind of defending their little foxhole, if you will, in this panicked mode. And as a result, they couldn't execute much of anything, much less innovate anything. Some small competitors in particular took away market share. They cut out a lot of costs, which made things put people even more into a survive mode. And you end up with two great old companies, a very, very capable, astonishing man in the background trying to help make this work, and total failure because nobody really appreciated the human nature elements that were being sent in the wrong direction and that would inevitably be a barrier to the type of innovation that the new merged firms needed. And there's a piece of that story that you can find in lots of places these days. Maybe not as dramatic, maybe not as big, but it's the same storyline.
The whole second part of the book for our audience, those of you who don't win the copy, get out and get their copy, because John goes through lots of different scenarios of change. I'll just give you an example because we're not going to get through them all. There's accelerating strategy execution, there's digital transformation, there's restructuring, there's M&A, there's revitalization of culture, there's creating sustainability and change and social change. But just because you mentioned Kraft Heinz, John, I'm going to jump ahead to something that you mentioned in M&A, because this really jumped out at me. You said managerial mindsets, metrics, and analytics dominate in these scenarios of mergers and acquisitions. To speed up what can take a long time and to keep people from worrying, organizations want to fight decision making. They want to fight too much thinking by the people because they don't want them involved too much. But this leads to major problems down the line. People start to worry, they start to create their own stories. And you tell us that the constant communication from leadership throughout the organization becomes extra vital in these instances.
Absolutely. And the M&A track record for the people who have, the finance people who've really studied that, of course, is not a good track record. The number of major mergers or big acquisitions that have paid back according to the storyline that was given to investors at the time of the merger or acquisition is much less than people would suspect by just reading the newspapers. And the problems are similar across industries, and they have to do with the fact that number one, all too often mergers are done in a way that send people into overheated survive. And number two, all too often the single biggest challenge isn't on the agenda or is low on the priority list of the people driving the merger integration. And that is the real integration of two human organizations, the real integration of a culture. And that requires, again, tons of communication. It requires some vision of what this new culture is all about, and a lot of action, not just words, that are demonstrating that there is a real benefit to putting these two pieces together. I had the opportunity a few months ago to bump into an unusual example of a merger situation, which is now the sixth largest bank in the United States. It's called Truist. Most people don't know the name yet because it's a new name in the Southeast. And the people who drove this from the board, the CEO, the COO, from the beginning, instead of treating it as a check the box exercise of putting together the new hierarchy and eliminating some personnel and making sure the IT systems, you've got somebody in charge of that. They began the whole process by, among other things, putting together a new board that included everybody from both the other boards, which nobody ever does, And by talking endlessly that this was going to be a real merger of equals, where they drew upon the strengths of both to create something truly outstanding. And from the beginning, they talked about purpose, talk about something that's not analytical and numbers driven in finance. Purpose, purpose, purpose from the start. And 2 months into this, they got hit with COVID, which could easily have crashed the whole thing because face-to-face communication becomes more difficult, if not impossible. And yet, with this mindset of the psychology behind it all is as important as the economics, that we really do have to win over the hearts and minds of both sets of people and create a new team. That thinking in terms of what is the purpose of all of this, and by the way, the purpose is not maximizing how much profit we can make in the short term to pay off a few investors. It's broader than that. And in communicating a lot, CEO holding regular kind of leadership sessions in which, among other things, one of which I was the invited guest to talk about the new book, of which he incredibly bought almost 28,000 copies.
Nice, John. That's
Which
nice. You got to give me his number, man.
He gave the book to more than half of his employees. A number of execs I know who would ever even think about that, no matter the book. I mean, why would you do that? But what he's signaling is these people are all important, and we all need to be talking about the same messages. That's how we create a new single entity that is a new single culture and something that is stronger than the two pieces that we put together in a merger.
One of the things that dawned on me as I read the book was the tension of opposites or duality that exists, and old and new, chaos and order, survive and thrive throughout the book. And this emerges again with mergers and acquisitions, because I thought about here, the visual image I created was, if you have a dominant color mixed with another color, it dominates. And this happens sometimes in organizations. And say, for example, it's an acquisition of a startup. Oftentimes the existing hierarchical organization dominates and takes over the culture, when that's not necessarily the right thing. And you talk here about survive and thrive are both necessary.
Oh, absolutely. You want survive working the way it was designed to deal with short-term problems and threats, and thrive to carry you into a innovative, powerful future. The problem you were referring to, which is big companies buying small, innovative companies. I remember when I first saw that decades ago, and it blew my mind. Big company buys this very, very innovative, a smaller company, younger company, for a high multiple, and basically brings it in and says, guys, we're so glad to have you here. Kill them all. I mean, it's mind-boggling. And what it was is the mothership, the bigger old piece, did nothing to worry about turnover in the new young organization, who looked at the big old new mothership and said, this is a bureaucratic, uninnovative nightmare. So you get good people fleeing, as fast as they can get out the doors. Um, and they literally punished others because they wouldn't adopt their policies. And the number of times that I've seen this happen over the years is, I mean, the social and economic cost of that is preposterous. And it's not necessary. It is possible to take something that is older and more formal and bureaucratic and something that is younger and more innovative and looser and integrate them together in a way that makes them both stronger, gives one scale and gives the other innovation. But that is not the norm today at all.
Part two, you go through all these different areas of change. One of them is strategic execution itself. And you give a brief history here of execution, but also the changes that are needed in strategy execution. There's a quote here that I couldn't resist sharing. It goes as follows: strategic planning is very much a management-centric activity, not a leadership-centric activity. Thus, it is built on processes designed primarily for reliability and efficiency. As the science of change would predict, it is therefore increasingly incapable of inducing sufficient speed, agility, smart adaptation, and real results that more and more people and institutions need. That absolutely nails the concept here. I'd love if you would expand on this.
I can still remember driving back with my wife from our place up in New Hampshire on a lake a few years ago, and having a telephone conversation through the car system with a guy who worked for a huge bank, not in the United States, but outside the United States. And he has read something that I've recently written and is just going on, and he's in the strategy group. And he's going on and on about, it's insane the way we do strategy. He says, we spend thousands of man hours putting together these big, thick documents that are called 5-year strategic plans. He says, increasingly, we can't make predictions with any certainty that go 1 year out. 5-year is a total fantasy. And the work of writing all of this down is taking a valuable management time, as well as staff time, like people like me. And yet we're caught in this is the way we've always done it, and we can't break out of it cycle, and it's going to kill us. And without naming the bank, which I'm not going to do, it didn't kill him, but it came close. It came close. Strategic planning, remember, goes back to the 60s or 70s. And the 60s and 70s were a much slower moving, less volatile world in which innovation was much less needed in most industries than today. The difference in 50 or 60 years is huge. So it grew up in an environment that was more predictable, less changing, et cetera, in which you could. It was kind of useful to force people to think ahead and not just about this quarter. And the primary managerial function in businesses was management anyway. Most people, that's their job. It's not leadership. Management is something that was not invented 2 millennia ago. It was invented after the Civil War in the United States. The first business school didn't exist until the 1880s, anywhere on Earth. Okay, first university goes back to about 1050. And it existed after the Civil War in the United States because the Industrial Revolution was producing these larger entities. Remember, It's not that long ago that the average business was employed, had a total employment of about 5 people. It was the family farm. And if it wasn't that, it was a shop. And it was mostly family members who one hired. Something with 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000, they didn't exist. This is a new phenomenon. And when they first came into being because of the Industrial Revolution, the problem was, how in the world do we have all these people and not have chaos? How can we produce efficiently some product and when we promise it to a customer, actually deliver it? So reliability and efficiency was the name of the game, and management was invented as a process of planning and budgeting and organizing and staffing and metrics for control and problem solving. And it's enormously important today, obviously, still. But it's not the process that helps us innovate, that helps us adapt, that helps us change quickly and take advantage of opportunities. And that is a problem in most firms in the strategy process right now today. And it's got to change.
I do a lot of work with organizations on visioning or their strategy, etc. And there's always huge resistance to including more people because it complicates things, and it does. It slows it down, absolutely. But really what all you're doing is kicking the can down the road. It's not going to stick because people don't buy into something they didn't create. They weren't involved in it. They weren't consulted. And you give the great example here of Agile. Say, for example, it's a website. And in the old world, you used to get a web developer to go off and then come back to the marketing team and go, ta-da, and they go, oh, that's not what we wanted. But now Agile development suggests you have all those people in the room, and strategy or vision is exactly the same thing.
There's a tendency for, still in the strategy process, for the executive committee and a small staff group, a very small number of people, to develop it and then, quote, communicate it down the hierarchy, where it hits people who are going, wait a minute. I can see 7 things that are wrong with this because these guys don't know my business. They don't know my problems. They don't know my opportunities. So I drag my feet or I unconsciously sabotage it, unconsciously, not consciously. And this happens all the time these days. And there is a solution, and it's the one you said, which is to get more people into it, more data into it, more hearts as well as minds into it from the beginning. And what we've learned is the argument against it was exactly the one you said, that doing this will simply, the number one argument, there were others, it'll slow us down too much. And you're telling me, Kotter, that we have to speed up. And now you're showing me something that's going to slow us down. Well, what we've discovered is no. If you do it in a very kind of management way of appointing committees and allowing committees all over the place to do things and then having to have committees meeting with committees and the like, it takes forever. But you don't have to do that. You can get a lot of people involved simply by through more informal means and make it clear we have to do this in a way that is timely and fast and smart. But the notion of diverse many is the term we use. Diverse many not only can come up with a better strategy through all the information and creativity that comes with diversity, but it can execute the strategy faster because so many people were involved, understand it, believe in it, have some emotional attachment to it, and are willing to run with it.
you give an example, the tale of two healthcare companies, one that focused on survive and the other one that's focused on thrive. Whether they call it that or not, that's what they did. But it was really interesting. I thought that something every change maker, every head of innovation, lots of CEOs will have experienced is negative power from people. So they can be nodding on the outside, but inside vehemently disagreeing with you and drag things back and kill it. And, we talk often, as you do in the book, about the middle management trap, not getting through that layer of rock, of magma that often blocks things. But you gave this example that when change initially happens, you get this kind of stall points. You get these points where maybe we didn't hit the quarter, maybe we didn't make it that month. And then those kind of naysayers start popping their head up and kind of going, I told you it wouldn't work. And again, like you do in so many of your works, so many of your books, it's backed up by research. You give us some solutions to this.
I can still remember being in our whiteboard room at our Cambridge office, and we had a client in, and they had made some significant progress, but they were going into a stall, and they were being criticized, the team that was driving this, just the way that you articulated it. Wait a minute, the stock price is not going up, it's flat. The profitability last quarter did not go up as per predictions. This whole process you created, it seems awfully complex, blah, 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 blah. And they're kind of saying to us, what do we do? And I can remember going up to the whiteboard and doing this diagram for them, saying, let's write down what you've been doing. And over here, I'm going to write down these results so far, but I've got a big space in between. I said, let's try to complete the diagram. What you're doing right now, if it's working, what are some early indicators of it working? Forget about the ultimate results we want for a second. Look at early indicators, and we wrote those down. And then some indicators after that, then results. So we came back to the early indicators, and I said, what does the data look like for these? And those were all going the right direction. And of course, the light bulb eventually comes on that it takes time to get those end results. But what you need to pay real attention to is the early indicators. Measure them. Are they going up as predicted by your actions? And if they are, that can give you both the ammunition to shoot down the naysayers, but also it gives you the self-confidence that you're really on the right track. And that meeting ended, I can still remember, with an energized group that was determined now to go back. And they did some amazing things over the next couple of years. Absolutely amazing.
John, I thought about how those, like you go back to the brain science again, you mentioned this earlier on, those small wins are so important. On this show, we've done episodes with the great BJ Fogg, for example, on tiny habits, the Stanford professor. And one of the reasons I did that is this is organizational habit you're trying to create. My son is, he's just 11. And I told him about this, set the bar low enough to achieve. For example, every time he's waiting for his computer to boot up, he'll do a few press-ups and then he'll celebrate those press-ups, and it's the exact same thing. These little wins that over time become the norm. And what's often missing, and I'm sure you see this, is leadership. You said, firstly, spotting them for themselves, but then sharing that back to the organization. And I often think about that expression that not saying thanks is like buying a gift for somebody, wrapping it and never giving it to them. And this is what happens in organizations.
From the time that we first found the importance of these short-term wins, at that time, I did not appreciate as much as I do today how important it is to celebrate them and communicate that out. A lot of people will say the comeback from execs is, it's not that big a deal. People ought to be able to do that. As opposed to, no, actually, if you look at this success, it's not huge, but for the people that did it, it was a big leap and it was important and it means something. And you need lots more of that type of activity going on. If you treat it as not really relevant, you're not going to get lots more of that activity. So celebrate it, communicate it, and you get this virtuous cycle of action, results, celebration. More people are attracted in. The naysayers have less power, which gets you more action, and da, 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 da. And that's how you change mindsets, ultimately. That's how you change habits, and that's how you can change culture.
It needs a big shift in, as you talk about, the shift from management to leadership, because this is why oftentimes people go, why do you do shows on this show about storytelling or about empathy or humility? Human skills, communication, for example. That's why, because those human skills have never been more important in leadership roles, in any role really, and that's why we talk about these human skills. I'd love your knowledge on this, John.
The list you just gave are all more associated with leadership than management, and the problem is multifold. I mean, business schools, probably of necessity, focus more on what is teachable and what is hard, if you will, and quantitative. That tends to be more the management stuff. Even if they know that in the long term, the leadership stuff is going to be as or more important for the graduates. And it's also complicated because of an argument that goes on very often that's a bad argument. It's the people who are interested, for example, and are doing what you're doing, talking about communication and empathy, and who implicitly say, that's what's important. All of this managerial stuff, we got to replace managers with leaders. No, you need them both because they serve different purposes for an organization. And the problem is simply we don't have enough leadership. So don't put down management. These guys keep the ship sailing every day. They make the trains run on time. They create the efficiencies which give you money that you can put into innovation. Don't put them down. Just grow the other side of the equation and appreciate both. Same with survive and thrive. You need both systems working in yourself and in your people.
One of the things we hear about all the time is the failure of digital transformation. So many figures, 75%, 80%, depending on which report you read, but it's high. And I'm sure it's even higher because people won't admit it that it didn't work.
Right.
But unfortunately, as you say in the book, and as we see, there's less success stories than there should be. And we often point to the same ones all the time because there's so few. But one of the things, and I experienced this firsthand, I worked in digital transformation for 8 years, and I was always asked for the latest digital strategy. And I go, well, I'll give you a digital strategy if you give me a strategy. So I was like, we need a corporate strategy, and digital will enable that strategy. And it constantly got me in trouble, and I just couldn't keep my mouth shut. But this is a huge problem in organizations still, and I can't believe it's still a huge problem. You see this a lot.
Oh, absolutely. When digital is not happening as well, as fast, or making the contribution that the CEO wants, it's not at all unusual to see that it's operating in its own little kind of world over here, quite independent of the top of the organization, which often doesn't have clarity of vision or strategy, or if they do, they haven't connected the two in a clear, explicit way. Because, I mean, digital transformation is one way to help your organize leap into the future and perform better and thrive. It isn't a thing by itself. It's a mechanism to help the business do better. But to make it do better, you have to have some clarity about what is the business and where are your opportunities and where are you trying to drive the overall company. Then you could put the digital piece within that context and have it supported. The other big problem for digital, of course, is it's delegated to the digital guys, which tend to be a small subset of the overall players. And they create stuff that they think makes sense, but doesn't necessarily make any sense to the sales guys or to the finance guys. And then you get fights, or you get wasted meetings and slow time, and et cetera, et cetera. A good digital strategy has a lot of non-digital people helping from as early on as you can. We had a terrific experience with a public utility outside the United States that was going through a massive digital transformation and was running into all kinds of problems. Some of the executive committee, I'm sure, thought this is madness and we're never going to. And they were highly unionized. And believe it or not, in this day and age, the key union people still thought they were communists. So when we showed up, I think at our first meeting over there, not in the United States, they were boycotting us. Oh, thank you, guys. Yeah, I'm a friend. But the key thing that the team did was to say, look, this is a organizational transformation that you're really focusing on, not just a digital thing. This isn't just a techie thing. And you need to get as many people in this organization as possible into this somehow, helping with you, believing in it. And it starts with leadership on the executive committee. And what they achieved over a couple of years is mind-boggling. We had on our team a man who was very Italian, wonderful friend of mine, but he knows Italy very, very well. But he helps us out, and I can still remember Maurizio saying when we were reviewing the results of that engagement. I won't try to do an accent. I'll blow it. He's saying, this is not the way Italy works. It just doesn't. It never works this way. This is amazing. Well, no, it's the same stuff based on a emerging science of change of what is possible in any culture. And what we need for nations and companies everywhere.
John, one of the last things I thought we'd have time for is culture itself. And I'm not saying that just because culture is often brought out, and we all know the famous Peter Drucker line, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm mentioning it because you were one of the pioneers in research into culture, along with your colleague at the time in Harvard Business School, Professor James Heskett. I'd love to share your findings because they are now more relevant than ever before. They're more important than ever before. And this goes right back to your book, Corporate Culture and Performance.
The first book that really was a bestseller on the topic of corporate culture came out in 1982, and it caught my attention. But the basic theme was that companies that performed well had, quote, strong cultures. That is to say, lots of people operated with the same norms based on the same implicit shared values about what was good and what was bad. So we tested that out with a group of something like, 300 companies, and then a subgroup of 25 companies. And what we found is, well, there is a positive correlation between strength of culture, how much we all kind of do it the same way, if you will, and performance, but it's weak. And it's because it's possible to have strong, stupid cultures. That's very condescending, and I apologize.
It's true. There's lots of people nodding, listening, John.
And so we said, okay, second study is we found the more the culture and the strategy actually kind of fit together, the higher the probability that the strategy would be executed. But the problem with that is, in a changing world, you have to change strategies, and culture is still back in the old form, and it holds you back. And so we finally came up with what you need is an adaptive culture, which had two characteristics. One is people really did value highly all the main constituencies. So customers, employees, and investors. They really thought it was their job to serve those people. And second, they believed that when they saw those people were not being served well, no matter where they were in the hierarchy, even if they weren't at the top, they had permission to take action to do something about it. Basically, to lead from the middle or even the lower levels of the firm. So you had, instead of a few eyeballs paying attention to the key players, customers, employees, investors, you had hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands. And instead of a few people who were charged and held accountable for taking action, you had thousands or tens of thousands. And of course, that made all the difference. That kind of a culture fit nicely into a world that was changing faster, more often, in bigger chunks, etc.
We talked about the challenge in finding great exemplars. One of the great exemplars has always been and still is IBM. And I say that because a lot of IBMers listen to the show as well, and they'd be delighted to hear that. But it really does go back to Thomas Watson. You talked about this from a merger opportunity, but also the way he empowered people and the way he stayed loyal to them during downturns. This really engendered a really positive culture.
Absolutely. And he was in the Peters and Waterman study that came out under the title In Search of Excellence. He was the kind of poster boy for what leadership excellence was. And if you look at what he focused on, it wasn't just the finances. I mean, he was very much paying attention to giving good rates of return to investors, but his focus on the customers in a way that was obsessive, and a focus on his employees at a time where nobody did that. Employees were hired and fired back in the 1920s and 1930s with little thought given to the long-term implications of that or the impact on their lives. Not Watson. He did it all. And you're right, he created the first global technology company through that. Amazing.
Because he stayed loyal, they had built up this knowledge and they'd built up R&D, etc. So when, for example, you mentioned a big government contract came up, they just got it by a mile because they had everything ready to go. I say that to say, because you studied culture, oftentimes a new leader comes in. So my background, sport, I played sport for a decade, professional sport, and oftentimes a new coach comes in and they're expected to wave a magic wand and all of a sudden change the culture of a team. It's the same thing for an organization. It takes time, and you do recognize this as well.
Absolutely. I can still remember somebody showing up at our offices a few years ago saying the CEO of a well-known European-based major corporation with hundreds of thousands of employees has charged me and my team of people who are about 5 levels down with changing the culture. I said, oh, really? You're going to do this? Okay. What's your time frame? And she says, he's given us 1 year. And I said, have you updated your resume? But that doesn't mean you have to be sitting around getting terrible results all during this period while you're changing your culture. Now we're back to short-term wins again. You can say the only way it's going to change is you've got to have credibility and you've got to keep people on your side. And one way to do that is to produce certain kinds of business wins that will not only help your own internal troops, but keep investors on your side and keep the public on your side too.
I'm going to wrap up now. I have a nice little way to finish the show, which is I pulled a quote that I absolutely loved from the book, and I'm going to end with that. But I wanted to, before I do that, just where can people find you? Where can people find Kotter Inc.? Where can people find the book, etc.?
The book, which is behind you, is this, right? So the main, what is that? Teal? Is that the color?
Yeah, it's a lovely color.
It's a lovely color.
Teal for a reason as well.
And Change is the name. And my name starts with a K, not a C. Keep that in mind. And you can reach me through the company is the easiest way. And it's just go to our website, kotterinc.com, kotterinc.com. There's lots of material there, free material about what we've learned, and some success stories. People seem to find it just useful to roam through that and learn through it, which is terrific. And you can leave notes for me. I actually do answer my email, and I'd be happy to answer questions or talk to anybody.
I'm going to give this quote, but I'd love you then to close the show with your final message, because you do leave the book with a final message, a greater call to action across the world. One other question that I haven't asked before, because you've got this beautiful library. Firstly, I'm jealous because it's so well organized compared to mine. Mine's organized, by the way, by depth. So they're all flat, but there's no color or anything like that organization. Yours looks really neat. What are you reading at the moment, John? What's on your list of books? I'm sure you have several, but what's going on at the moment?
I'm reading 3 books right now. One is about Teddy Roosevelt, President Roosevelt, and J.P. Morgan and their relationship back at the turn of the last century. One is about the changing publishing business. And one is one of those kind of lawyer thriller type books.
Great. I love the diversity of that alone, that range of books. So, John, I'm going to finish now with this quote, and I'll hand it to you to finish today's show. It's been an absolute honor speaking to you. Here we go. Final quote from me, and I'll hand it to you then. The Thrive Channel also has a radar system. But instead of looking for threats, it seeks opportunities. When Thrive spots possibilities, an internal mechanism is activated that sends out a different set of chemicals than Survive, like oxytocin and vasopressin. In the Thrive response, our energy goes up but does not spike. Thrive is accompanied by emotions like passion and excitement rather than anxiety or anger. Our field of focus does not shrink. It often does the opposite, expanding as curiosity about the opportunity broadens one's field of vision. When a response is not activated to worry about one's own immediate and personal survival, and with positive emotions flowing instead, we are much more open to collaboration, creativity, and innovation. The mind and body search for ways to move toward the opportunity, and as long as we see evidence that we are making progress, our increased energy can be sustained for a remarkably long period of time without feeling burned out. I absolutely love that. I thought that brought together so many of the concepts in the book beautifully. But over to you, John. What's your final message to our audience?
The opportunities out there today that are being created by change are vast and underreported. What the news media gives us are the problems and the threats and the ugliness and the downside, to the point where we can all become panicked in a Survive sense. The reality is change produces as many opportunities as threats, and the upside for what is possible over the coming decades is unknown, except that it's very high. And the more of us can be activating the Thrive piece of ourselves and our colleagues and our organizations, the more we'll be able to take advantage of those opportunities and create a world where our children and our grandchildren will benefit.
Beautiful. Author of Change, How Organizations Achieve Hard-to-Imagine Results in Uncertain and Volatile Times. A legend in the field of change. An absolute honor to speak to you. John Kotter, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Great fun.